The rain drummed against the kitchen window as I stared at my untouched coffee, now cold. 5 days. 120 hours of unanswered calls, ignored messages, and a silence so complete it felt like drowning. The police had filed a report but told me to wait. Adults have the right to disappear, they said. Friends offered theories ranging from amnesia to affairs, but none of them had to sleep in our bed alone. None of them had to wonder if their wife was lying in a ditch somewhere. The sound of a key scraping against the front door lock made my heart stop. I heard it turn once, twice, then nothing. A moment later, aggressive knocking rattled the frame. I opened the door to find her standing there, mascara perfect, hair styled, wearing clothes I'd never seen before. Designer jeans, a leather jacket that probably cost more than our mortgage payment. She looked like she'd just stepped out of a magazine shoot, not like someone who'd vanished without a trace for nearly a week. "The lock isn't working," she said, brushing past me before I could respond. "Not, I'm sorry. Not, I can explain." Just irritation that her keycard, the electronic smart lock we'd installed last year, had failed her. I stood in the doorway, watching her kick off expensive new boots. "Where were you?" She glanced at me over her shoulder, and I saw it, that smirk. Small, but unmistakable. "Does it matter? I'm back now." She moved toward the stairs. "You should be thankful I came back at all." The words hit me like a physical blow. Thankful. I'd filed a missing persons report. I'd called hospitals. I'd driven around the city at 3 in the morning searching parking lots and back alleys. I'd contacted her family, her friends, her co-workers, humiliating myself with each call that revealed she hadn't told anyone where she was going. And I should be thankful? Stop. My voice came out harder than I'd intended. She paused, one hand on the banister. "I need an explanation. I need to know where you were." She turned fully now, and I barely recognized the expression on her face. There was contempt there, amusement even. I needed space. Time to think. "I don't owe you a minute-by-minute breakdown of my life. You were gone for 5 days. Without a word." "And now I'm back," she said, as if that settled everything. "I'm exhausted. We'll talk later." She started up the stairs. I didn't follow. Instead, I walked to the hall closet and pulled out the suitcase I'd packed earlier that morning, after I'd made my decision in the cold, harsh light of dawn. I'd spent 5 days in hell, and she'd spent them, where? Doing what? With whom? The not knowing had nearly destroyed me, but her return, so casual, so callous, had finished the job. I carried the suitcase to the foyer and set it down with a heavy thud. The sound made her stop halfway up the stairs. "What's that?" she asked. "Your things. Some of them, anyway. The rest will be delivered." She descended slowly, her face a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "Excuse me. Your keycard was disabled yesterday at 2 p.m. I'm surprised the lock didn't notify you when you tried to use it." I pulled out my phone and showed her the app notification. "See. Access revoked. 26 hours ago." The color drained from her face. "You can't." "I can, and I did. You abandoned this marriage. You disappeared without explanation, without concern for my feelings or my sanity. And you came back expecting, what? That everything would be fine? That I'd just accept this?" "You're being ridiculous," she snapped, but I heard the uncertainty creeping into her voice. "This is my house too." "Was," I corrected. Past tense. "You made a choice when you walked out that door 5 days ago. I'm making mine now. Take the suitcase. Leave." She stared at me like I'd grown a second head, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. This wasn't how she'd expected this to go. Whatever scenario she'd imagined for her triumphant return, it hadn't included this. "We're married," she finally said. "You can't just throw me out." I pulled a folded document from my pocket and held it up. "Separation papers. Filed this morning. You'll be served officially tomorrow, but I thought you deserved a preview. And before you think about making this difficult." I pulled out a second document. "Temporary restraining order. Pending, but given the circumstances, your unexplained abandonment, my documented distress, the police report, my attorney is confident it'll be approved by tomorrow afternoon." Her eyes widened. "You're insane." "No," I said quietly. "I'm done. There's a difference." She didn't take the suitcase that night. Instead, she'd stood in my foyer for another 20 minutes, cycling through emotions like someone flipping channels. Anger, disbelief, condescension, fake tears that dried up when they didn't move me. Finally, when I'd pulled out my phone and started recording, she'd grabbed the suitcase and left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame. I'd thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. She returned the next morning at 7:30, pounding on the door so hard the neighbor's porch lights flickered on. I opened it to the chain lock limit, coffee in hand. "I'm not leaving until we talk about this rationally," she announced, dressed in yesterday's clothes. Apparently she'd spent the night in her car or at a friend's place. "You're upset, I understand that, but you're not thinking clearly." "I've never been more clear in my life. You need to leave, or I'll call the police." "For what?" "Standing on my own porch." She tried to wedge her foot in the door, but I'd anticipated that. The chain lock held firm. For violating the restraining order that was approved an hour ago. I held up my phone, showing her the notification from my attorney. "Temporarily granted based on the emergency circumstances. You're legally required to stay at least 100 yards away from this property and from me. The server will have the physical papers for you later today, but the order is already active." Her face went through several shades of red. "This is insane. You can't keep me from my own home. It stopped being your home when you abandoned it. And me." I started to close the door. "Wait." Her voice cracked. "At least tell me why. What did I do that was so terrible? So I needed a few days away. Is that really worth destroying our marriage over?" I paused, studying her face through the gap. She seemed genuinely confused, which somehow made it worse. "You really don't see it, do you? It's not that you left. It's that you left without a word. Without concern. And you came back like I was supposed to be grateful, like I was supposed to just accept being discarded and reclaimed on your schedule. I had things I needed to work through. Then you work through them like an adult. You communicate. You don't vanish and let your husband think you might be dead in a ditch somewhere." My hand tightened on the doorframe. "I called 16 hospitals. Did you know that? 16. I drove to that hiking trail you love at midnight because I thought maybe you'd fallen. I filed a missing persons report and watched the police treat me like a suspect because statistically, it's usually the husband. You put me through hell, and you don't even think you did anything wrong." "I didn't mean," she started, but I cut her off. "It doesn't matter what you meant. It matters what you did. Now please leave before I call the police." I closed the door. She pounded for another 5 minutes before finally leaving. I watched through the window as she sat in her car for an hour, just staring at the house. Waiting for me to change my mind. Probably. I didn't. She came back that afternoon. And the next morning. And the evening after that. Each time with a different approach, angry demands, tearful apologies, rational arguments about property rights and marital assets. Once she brought her mother, who rang the doorbell 17 times in a row while shouting about what a mistake I was making. I documented everything. Photos, videos, timestamps. My attorney said it would help when the final restraining order hearing came up. Each violation was evidence. Each scene she created was another nail in the coffin of whatever legal standing she thought she had. On day 4 of her siege, I arrived home from work to find her sitting on the porch steps. She looked exhausted, her hair unwashed, wearing sweatpants and a wrinkled t-shirt. This was the closest she'd looked to actually distressed since she'd returned. "I lost my job," she said without preamble. "They said my unexplained absence violated company policy. And my credit cards aren't working. Did you cancel them?" "The joint accounts, yes. As is my right when filing for separation. Your personal cards should be fine." "I don't have personal cards. Everything was linked to our joint accounts." She looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw something that might have been genuine fear. Where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do? I felt a flicker of something, not quite sympathy, but not satisfaction either. Just a dull, heavy sadness. You should have thought about that before you disappeared. Before you came back smirking. Before you treated our marriage like something you could pause and unpause at will. I made a mistake, she whispered. Yes, I agreed. You did. Several of them. And now you're experiencing the consequences. So that's it. After 7 years together, you're just done? You won't even fight for us. I sat down on the top step, maintaining distance but finally engaging with her directly. I fought for us for 5 days while you were gone. I fought for us every time I picked up the phone to call another hospital, another police station. I fought for us when I should have been angry, when any rational person would have been planning exactly this. I gestured between us. You didn't fight for us. You didn't even think about us. You thought about you. She was crying now, but they looked like real tears this time. Where was I supposed to go? My mom won't let me stay more than a night or two. I don't have money for a hotel. My friends. She trailed off, and I filled in the blank. Her friends had probably heard her version of events and found it as lacking as I did. There's a women's shelter on Oak Street. They help people in transition. Or you could try your sister's place upstate. A shelter. You want me to go to a homeless shelter. I want you to leave my property before I call the police again. Where you go from here is your choice. Just like leaving was your choice. Just like coming back acting like you'd done me a favor was your choice. I stood up. You're good at making choices. Figure it out. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by a process server who looked uncomfortable handing it to me. Inside were counterfiling papers. She was suing for divorce on grounds of abandonment and emotional cruelty. The irony would have been funny if it didn't come with a demand for alimony and half of everything we owned. I handed the papers to my attorney, David, during our meeting that afternoon. He read them over his reading glasses with the expression of someone who'd seen it all before. Interesting strategy, he said dryly. Filing counterclaims while simultaneously violating a restraining order. Did she show up again yesterday? Twice. Morning and evening. I've got video. I pulled up my phone to show him the footage, her shouting through the door, demanding I be reasonable, threatening to break a window. She hadn't, thankfully, but the threat was recorded. Good. That helps us. He set the papers down. Her attorney is Gerald Paxton. He's aggressive but sloppy. Makes big claims he can't back up in court. The emotional cruelty angle won't stick. You have documented evidence of her abandonment and her behavior upon return. The alimony request is laughable given the circumstances and the short duration of the marriage. 7 years isn't short, I pointed out. In legal terms, it's moderate. And given that you both worked, she has her own earning potential, or had, before she lost her job. A judge isn't going to reward someone who abandoned their spouse with permanent alimony. Temporary support, maybe, but even that's a stretch. He leaned back in his chair. What I'm more interested in is where she was for those 5 days. Have you found out yet? I shook my head. She won't say. Just keeps insisting she needed space. 5 days is a long time to need space. It's also long enough to establish a pattern of behavior. He tapped the papers. I'm going to file a discovery motion. Bank records, credit card statements, phone records for that period. If she's hiding something, we'll find it. Do you think she is hiding something? David gave me a long look. In my experience, people don't lawyer up with someone like Paxton unless they have something to protect or something to hide. And they don't act the way she's acting, entitled, aggressive, playing victim, unless they feel cornered. So yes, I think she's hiding something. The discovery results came back 3 weeks later, and they were illuminating. During her 5-day absence, her phone had pinged off cell towers in Sterling Heights, an affluent suburb 2 hours away. Her credit card, the one personal card she'd apparently forgotten about, showed charges at high-end restaurants, a luxury hotel, and a jewelry store. But the most interesting item was a withdrawal from our joint savings account on day 2 of her disappearance. $5,000, taken from an ATM in Sterling Heights. I'd noticed the withdrawal when checking our accounts obsessively during her absence, but I'd assumed it was fraud, something to report after she came back safe. Now it looked a lot more deliberate. Sterling Heights, David said, spreading the records across his desk. Know anyone there? No. We don't have family or friends in that area. I stared at the hotel charges. The Riverside Grand. That's the place with the rooftop restaurant and the luxury suites. 4 nights at roughly $300 per night. Plus room service, spa treatments, and... He checked another page, 2 charges at a men's boutique. $300 and $800 respectively. The implication hung in the air between us. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. She was with someone. That's what the evidence suggests. But we need proof. The hotel might have security footage, but that's harder to get without a subpoena. What we can do is submit these records as evidence of her abandonment being premeditated and her claim of needing space being fabricated. I barely heard him. My mind was reeling through the implications. She hadn't been in crisis. She hadn't been working through anything. She'd been on what amounted to a vacation, with someone else, using our money, while I'd been losing my mind with worry. Who? I asked. Who was she with? David pulled out another document. Phone records show repeated calls to one number during that period. 17 calls over 5 days. The number is registered to a James Castellano. Does that name mean anything to you? It did. James was a client at her firm, or had been. She'd mentioned him several times over the past few months, always in the context of a difficult account she was managing. Demanding, she'd said. Particular about everything. They'd had several late-night meetings to accommodate his schedule. Her client, I said numbly. She told me he was difficult to work with. Apparently not that difficult. David's tone was carefully neutral. This gives us leverage. Evidence of an affair, combined with her abandonment and her behavior upon return, plus the violation of the restraining order. Paxton's going to have a hard time painting you as the bad guy here. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I just felt hollow. 7 years of marriage, reduced to phone records and credit card statements. 7 years, and she'd thrown it away for some client with money and a taste for luxury hotels. What now? I asked. Now we respond to her filing with our evidence. We make it clear that any negotiation needs to account for her infidelity, her abandonment, and her misuse of marital assets. With this evidence, she has very little standing for alimony or a 50-50 split. If she's smart, she'll settle quickly and quietly. And if she's not smart? David smiled grimly. Then we go to court, and I make sure the judge sees exactly who she is and what she did. Trust me, it won't be pretty for her. That evening, she showed up at my door again. I watched her through the security camera, debating whether to even acknowledge her presence. She looked worse than before, hair in a messy ponytail, no makeup, the same sweatpants from last week. She wasn't pounding or shouting this time. She just stood there, staring at the camera. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely audible through the intercom. I know you found out about James. I know you know where I was. I stayed silent, watching. It didn't mean anything. It was a mistake. A moment of weakness. She pressed her hand against the door. Please. Can we just talk? Face to face? I need you to understand. I picked up my phone and pressed the intercom button. You're violating the restraining order. Again. And no, you don't get to explain. You don't get to make this make sense. You made your choices. It was 5 days. Her voice rose, frustration bleeding through. 5 days compared to 7 years, and you're throwing everything away. You threw it away, I said quietly. The moment you decided a luxury hotel with your client was more important than your marriage. The moment you took our money to fund your escape. The moment you came back smirking, acting like I should be grateful. You threw it away. I'm just accepting what you already did. The court date for the final restraining order hearing arrived with the late autumn rain, the kind that turns the world grey and makes everything feel heavier. I sat in the courthouse hallway, David beside me reviewing notes, while she sat across from us with Gerald Paxton, her attorney. They were deep in what looked like an intense conversation, his expression growing increasingly irritated as he read through documents. She'd lost more weight. Her clothes hung loosely, and the dark circles under her eyes suggested she wasn't sleeping. Part of me, the part that had loved her for 7 years, wanted to feel sympathy. The rest of me remembered the smirk, the entitlement, the 5 days of hell she'd put me through without a second thought. "Mr. Paxton looks unhappy," David murmured. My guess is she didn't tell him the full truth about Sterling Heights until we filed our evidence. He was right. When we were called into the courtroom, Paxton's opening statement was noticeably more subdued than the aggressive posturing suggested by her counter-filing papers. Judge Patricia Morrison, a stern woman in her 60s with a reputation for not tolerating nonsense, listened impassively as he attempted to paint me as controlling and reactionary. Then it was David's turn. He presented the timeline methodically: the 5-day disappearance, the missing persons report, the phone records showing she was in contact with James Castellano throughout, the hotel receipts, the withdrawal of $5,000 from our joint account. He showed the video of her return, audio enhanced to clearly capture her words: "You should be thankful I came back at all." Judge Morrison's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. I'd been around enough courtrooms to recognize the look, disappointment mixed with disapproval. "Mrs. Harrison," the judge said, addressing her directly, "did you inform your husband of your whereabouts during these 5 days?" She stood, hands clasped in front of her. "No, Your Honor, I didn't. I needed time to think." "Did you inform anyone of your whereabouts? Family members, friends, co-workers?" A pause. "No, Your Honor." "Were you aware that your husband filed a missing persons report?" I found out later, yes." "Did it occur to you that your unexplained absence might cause him distress? Concern for your safety?" "I wasn't thinking clearly, Your Honor. I was dealing with personal issues. Personal issues that required a luxury hotel suite and the company of." Judge Morrison checked the documents: Mr. James Castellano. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. She opened her mouth, closed it, looked at Paxton for help. He remained seated, apparently having decided this was a battle he couldn't win. "Your Honor," she finally said, "my relationship with Mr. Castellano is complicated, but it's not relevant to—" "It's entirely relevant to this hearing," Judge Morrison interrupted. "Mr. Harrison filed for a restraining order based on your abandonment of the marriage and your subsequent behavior. You counterfiled claiming emotional cruelty and attempting to paint yourself as the injured party. The evidence suggests otherwise." She set down the documents. "The restraining order is granted for a period of 1 year, renewable if violations continue. You are to maintain a distance of at least 100 yards from Mr. Harrison and the marital residence. Any further violations will result in contempt charges." "Your Honor, please," she started, but the judge held up a hand. "I'm not finished. Regarding the divorce proceedings, given the evidence of infidelity, abandonment, and misuse of marital assets, I'm ordering mandatory mediation before this proceeds to trial. However, I want to be clear, Mrs. Harrison, you enter those negotiations from a position of significant weakness. Your behavior does not entitle you to the generous settlement you're requesting. I suggest you and Mr. Paxton approach mediation realistically." We left the courthouse in silence. David was pleased with the outcome. I just felt drained. 7 years of marriage ended in a 45-minute hearing where a judge had to tell my wife she behaved deplorably. The mediation sessions began 2 weeks later. We sat across from each other at a conference table, a neutral mediator between us trying to divide up the remnants of our life together. She'd gotten a job, nothing like her previous position, but enough to survive. James Castellano, it turned out, had stopped returning her calls the moment he learned I was filing for divorce. Apparently, he'd been interested in her as a secret, not as a long-term prospect. "The house," the mediator said, referring to her notes. Given that Mr. Harrison can afford the mortgage independently and has been maintaining the property, the recommendation is that he retain the house and buy out Mrs. Harrison's equity share, adjusted for her withdrawal of $5,000 from the joint account. "That's not fair," she said. It was approximately the 20th time she'd said those words in 2 hours. "I helped pay that mortgage for 7 years. And then you used marital funds for an extramarital affair," David countered. "Your equity contribution is offset by your misappropriation of assets." The mediator continued down the list. Retirement accounts split proportionally. Cars, she got hers, I got mine. Furniture and household items to be divided by mutual agreement or sold. Debts allocated according to who incurred them. Regarding alimony, the mediator said, and I saw her sit up straighter, hopeful. Given the moderate length of the marriage, both parties' employment status, and the circumstances of the separation, the recommendation is no permanent alimony. A temporary support payment of $1,000 per month for 6 months to assist Mrs. Harrison in establishing independent housing. 6 months. Her voice rose. "That's nothing. I can't survive on that." "You should have considered that before spending 5 days in a luxury hotel with your lover," I said quietly. It was the first time I'd spoken directly to her since we'd entered mediation. "You gambled our marriage on whatever you thought James could give you. You lost. These are the consequences." She stared at me, eyes brimming with tears. "You used to love me. You used to be kind." "I still am kind. Kind would be taking you to court and letting a judge award you even less. Kind would be making sure everyone we know understands exactly what you did. Kind is me sitting here, negotiating with you at all instead of burning everything down out of spite." I leaned forward slightly. "You want to know what happened to the man who loved you? He died somewhere between our 60 and 70 of your disappearance, when he realized his wife might be gone forever. You killed him when you walked back in smirking, expecting gratitude. This is who's left." The mediation ended with a tentative agreement, subject to final approval and signatures. David assured me it was better than I would have gotten in trial, faster and cleaner. As we left the building, I saw her standing by her car, watching me. For a moment, I thought she might approach, violate the restraining order one final time. Instead, she just stood there, looking lost. I drove home to the house we'd bought together, full of furniture we'd chosen together, filled with echoes of a life that no longer existed. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I just felt tired. 6 months after the final divorce papers were signed, I stood in my kitchen making coffee and realized I'd made it through an entire morning without thinking about her. It was a small victory, but it felt significant. The house had changed. I'd repainted the bedroom, replaced the furniture in the living room, and turned her old office into a home gym. The space was becoming mine, not ours. David called that afternoon with news. "You'll want to hear this," he said, and I could hear the wry amusement in his voice. "Gerald Paxton is being investigated by the state bar. Turns out he's been encouraging clients to hide assets and falsify financial disclosures. 3 of his divorce cases from the past 2 years are being reopened." "Does that affect our settlement?" I asked. "No, everything's finalized. But it does mean your ex-wife's strategy was worse than we thought. Paxton probably encouraged her to go aggressive with her claims knowing they'd never stand up in court, just to drag things out and rack up fees. She paid him almost $15,000, according to court records. Money she didn't have, I thought. Money that probably came from maxing out credit cards or borrowing from family. The temporary alimony had ended 2 months ago. I'd heard through mutual friends that she was working 2 jobs now, trying to rebuild her life. We had no contact, the restraining order had expired, but we both understood some distances were permanent. "There's something else," David continued. "James Castellano filed for bankruptcy last month. His business collapsed. Turns out the wealthy client image was mostly debt and borrowed money. Your ex-wife picked poorly all around." I should have felt satisfaction at that news. Instead, I felt a sort of distant sadness. She'd blown up her life for a fantasy, and the fantasy had been built on sand. We'd both lost something, but at least I'd chosen to walk away with my dignity intact. That evening, I went to dinner with Sarah, a colleague who'd asked me out twice before I'd finally said yes. We talked about work, about books, about travel plans. She didn't ask about my divorce except to confirm I was ready to move forward. I appreciated that, the not having to explain, the not having to justify, the ability to just be present in the moment. "You seem lighter," she said over dessert, "than when I first asked you out, I mean. Like something heavy has lifted." "It has," I admitted. "I spent a lot of time being angry, then being sad. Now I'm just here, ready to figure out what comes next." "And what does come next?" I thought about the question. "I don't know exactly, but it'll be something I choose, not something that happens to me. That feels important." The next morning, I found an envelope in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a single handwritten letter on plain paper. Her handwriting. "I know I don't have the right to contact you. I know the restraining order technically expired and you could have me arrested if you wanted to. But I needed to write this, even if you tear it up without reading. I've been going to therapy. Twice a week for 4 months now. My therapist says I was having a crisis, midlife, quarter-life, whatever you want to call it. I felt trapped in a life I'd chosen but wasn't sure I wanted any more. Instead of talking to you, instead of being honest, I ran. I made the worst possible choices in the worst possible way. James was a fantasy. A different life where I was someone else, someone exciting and wanted. It was never real. I knew that even then, but I didn't care because real life felt suffocating. Our marriage felt suffocating, not because of you, but because of me. And instead of fixing myself, I tried to fix it by blowing everything up. You asked me once why I smirked when I came back. I've thought about that a lot. I think I was trying to convince myself I'd been powerful, in control, making a choice. The truth was I was terrified. Terrified you'd see through me, see how broken I was. So I acted like I'd done you a favor by returning, because the alternative was admitting I'd made a catastrophic mistake. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything. I just wanted you to know that I understand now what I did to you. What I threw away. You deserved so much better than what I gave you, especially at the end. I hope you're happy. I genuinely mean that. You earned it." I read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and put it in a drawer. Not to save it sentimentally, but because it felt like the final page of a chapter that needed to be acknowledged before closing. She'd given me what she probably thought I needed, an explanation, an apology, an acknowledgement of harm. The truth was, I didn't need it anymore. I'd built my understanding of what happened through therapy of my own, through long conversations with friends, through quiet nights of reflection. Her reasons didn't change what she'd done or how it had felt. They didn't erase the 5 days of hell or the smirk or the entitlement that followed. But they did offer something unexpected. Closure. Not for her sake, but for mine. The ability to understand that broken people do broken things, and sometimes the kindest thing we can do is let them go. I made coffee, threw out the envelope, and opened my laptop to respond to an email from Sarah about weekend plans. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window, the same window I'd stared through while drinking cold coffee and waiting for news about my missing wife. The memory felt distant now, like something that had happened to someone else. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Final financial audit complete. Everything's settled. Officially done with this case. Congratulations on your freedom. Freedom. The word felt right. Not freedom from her specifically, but freedom from the weight of a dying marriage I'd been carrying without realizing it. Freedom from the expectation that love was enough to fix fundamental incompatibilities. Freedom to rebuild something new, something chosen, something mine. I texted back, "Thanks for everything. Drinks on me next week." Then I closed my laptop, finished my coffee, and got ready for the day. There were no dramatic revelations, no sudden moments of clarity or transformation. Just the quiet realization that I'd survived something difficult and come through it changed, but intact. That evening, I removed her letter from the drawer and read it one final time. Then I shredded it. Not out of anger or bitterness, but because it represented a conversation I no longer needed to have. She'd said her piece. I'd received it. Now we could both move forward into whatever came next. Outside, the season was changing again. Fall giving way to winter, the cycle continuing regardless of human drama. I'd plant new things in the spring, I decided. Redo the garden we'd neglected for years. Fill the house with life and color and growth. 7 years of marriage had ended with papers and mediators and restraining orders. But what came after was entirely up to me. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, that possibility felt like hope instead of fear. I turned off the lights, locked the door, and went to bed in a house that was finally, truly, just mine. Tomorrow I'd wake up and continue building the life I was choosing. But tonight, I slept soundly, dreamless and untroubled, in the space she'd left behind. The story of what she'd done would always be part of my history. But it was no longer the story that defined me. That story, the one about who I'd become after surviving her return, was still being written. And I intended to make it worth reading.